Today's Imprint Weekly podcast is brought to you by Accenture. Change is afoot in child welfare. Change that means agencies focus on results for children and keep far more of them safe at home with their own families. Accenture's child welfare team is leading the way in the effort to ensure technology does its part in that success story. Accenture offers cutting-edge case management tools that ensure agencies can see insights that drive decision-making and caseworkers have information they need at their fingertips. Together, these tools help agencies stay laser-focused, reinventing child welfare into a source of strength for families when they need it. For more information, visit www.accenture.com/child-welfare.
Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, Senior Editor of the Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at the Imprint News. You can sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business, policy, and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the Safe Camp Audio Network. Check out our show page and all of Safe Camp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on social media. We are going to be sans headlines today. I had to head out of town for my wife's family reunion, so did not have time to pull that together, but we have a great guest who we talked to for quite a while, so it is just as well. Today we are joined by Darrell Missey, Director of the Children's Division for the state of Missouri, who really had an interesting journey to this job. We talked to him about his own family growing up, how he ran for and won a judicial election focusing on child welfare reform as a platform, and what his plans are for realigning Missouri's system around family preservation and less use of foster care. Quick programming note going forward, we have no podcast next week since it is July 4th holiday weekend. When we come back from that, we're going to be doing a series of great guest interviews called Safe Camp Spotlights, featuring conversations with the hosts of the terrific shows featured on Safe Camp Audio. We will still do the headlines, of course, but the rest of the summer, the guests are all going to be Safe Camp Audio show members, and we've already recorded a bunch of these. If you're thinking, this is going to be some PR, I promise, not the case. You'll get to know some really interesting people in the child welfare and youth justice space doing these podcasts, learn what they're hoping to accomplish in this audio space and all of that. So I definitely hope you will tune in for those. Really loved having those conversations. Now, without further ado, let's get to our conversation with Darrell Missey. We are joined today by Darrell Missey, who after nearly 20 years on the bench as a Missouri judge, became the state's child welfare director at the beginning of January 2022. We'll talk about his path to that job, his plans for reform in a state with one of the highest rates of foster care in the country, and how he thinks it's going so far. So, Darrell, thanks for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you, John. I'm honored to be here.
We got to get these folks to know you a little bit before we get into the weeds. You got to give us at least one of your favorites from these categories: TV show or movie, book, musical group, or sports team. Darrell Missey, what do you got?
My favorite sports team is the St. Louis Cardinals, followed closely by the Kansas City Chiefs, so I'm an all-Missouri guy. Favorite musical group is Journey, old stadium rock band from the 1970s and 80s. So
I'm a Michigander, so they're very popular up here, particularly at Red Wings games when they play the beginning of Don't Stop Believin', and then they cut the music off and everybody yells South Detroit. So Journey's alive and well up here.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. That's from the Escape album, one of the best albums ever made. Ever.
Dropping trivia on the top. That's a lot of winning that you're doing in the sports world, by the way, too.
Right. Well, the Cardinals are having a rough season, but the Chiefs are on a roll. So it's all very good.
So, Darrell, your experience with the child welfare system begins kind of in a personal way, actually in a very personal way, back in the 70s, where you and your family kind of have a sliding doors moment of sorts. Can you tell folks a little bit about your first experience? I bet you didn't know it was with the child welfare system at the time. Well,
it wasn't with the child welfare system. It would have been with the child welfare system if they had found us. So when I was growing up, my mother had a really severe form of bipolar disorder. And my mom was terrific. I mean, she was brilliant and wonderful and just loving and kind and decent and also really mentally ill. And so when she would have an episode, it would be bad. And in 1974, after the birth of my youngest daughter, she had basically a psychic break, and the situation in our house became very, very difficult. And
your youngest sister, you meant? I think you said daughter. Your youngest sister.
My youngest sister. Yeah, my youngest sister was born when I was 7. And it was really a difficult circumstance where mom was doing and saying all sorts of strange things and becoming violent with dad, which was not like her, and dirty clothes everywhere and dirty dishes everywhere and grime every place. And my family took care of itself. My mom went to a mental institution for 3 months, which was tough. And my grandmother came over and cleaned house for 3 months, which was interesting to watch. It's like, I thought she was a clean freak. And we had, and we weathered it and we got through it. And really watching my mom struggle with her bipolar disorder was a part of growing up. And, when you fast forward to me practicing law as a young lawyer, and I became involved in these cases with these families who were involved in the child welfare system for one reason or the other, I would look at them and scratch my head and think my family situation was worse than this. And these people's families have been broken up, and this radical reaction had happened. And I thought, oh my goodness, it could have been me. And so I always knew it could have been me. And so I always tried when I was a lawyer and then later when I was a judge to treat those families the way I would have wanted my family treated, because I knew it could have been us. It wasn't us, but man, it could have been.
Did you guys rely at all or interact at all with, government, so to speak? I obviously, child welfare didn't come and investigate and do that sort of thing, but was there any sort of safety plan or support from outside your family, or did you guys really just get it done, totally insular?
Oh, we got it done inside. And that's why, I really like the idea of, having team decision-making meetings and having families come around themselves and be experts on themselves. So, our safety plan involved mom going away for 3 months. My maternal grandmother moved in. My paternal grandmother took care of the baby. We had a lot of supports and a lot of understanding coming from our public school, which was, a central piece of our life, but no government programs but here's what I will tell you, John. We could have used that kind of help. I mean, we could have used somebody to come in and help us with, here's how you deal with mental illness. Here's some counseling you all could use. I mean, my parents made it. They were married for, I guess, 33 years when my dad passed away. They had a great marriage, but man, it was bumpy during those times. And
sure.
Really, my father was heroic. I mean, I think about a lot of these families, and I watched their situations, and I would think, what's missing that they had? And they don't have Leroy Missey. That's what they don't have. They don't have my dad, and that's why I really gravitate toward the idea of finding the strengths inside of a family, inside of a community, and helping people marshal those and make that happen.
Yeah. All right. So I'm terrible at math, but by my calculations, it's 28 years after that experience. It's 2002. You're 35 now. You do something pretty atypical. First, you challenged a sitting judge for re-election, which is kind of not done a lot. And then you ran on an agenda of shaking things up on the child welfare docket, which it's very, very rare that that's a focal point of a judge contest. So what prompted that? I mean, did something in particular spark your interest as an adult with child welfare, or did you stay interested in these family issues, from the time you were a kid all the way up to here?
Yeah. So here's the story, John. What happened is I was a young lawyer and I was trying to have a general civil practice, and I was trying a lot of different kinds of cases, and I had this wonderful practice. But what was walking in my front door, because we had an office across the street from the courthouse, were all these sad families. I was being appointed guardian ad litem for some of these children until the judge got really mad at me because I was challenging all the things she wanted to do. And I was watching their lives break apart and watching their hearts break and watching it occur over things that were no different than what my family faced, because almost every single one of them, it wasn't like horrible abuse was going on in these cases. It was all about mental illness and substance abuse, which, by the way, if you understand addiction, is like mental illness. And the fact that these people were not being provided with any help, I found to be not right. And I knew that the law wasn't being followed. The law of reasonable efforts before you remove them wasn't being followed. The law with regard to trying to send them back was not being followed, and it was being driven by the philosophy of the judge. The judge was, just to summarize it, she took too many kids into foster care. I never saw her reject a request. In fact, I heard from juvenile officers, she told them to go request in certain facts, stepping way over the lines of what a judge should do. Would not give children back. We had outrageous numbers of children coming into foster care. If you had an infant come into foster care, it seemed to me the odds of that child going home were almost nil because they got placed with a pre-adoptive foster home. And it was the most unfair thing I had ever experienced in my life.
Sorry to interject, but I read up a little bit on Jefferson County at the time, and I had not heard this term, but the judge that you were running against, Karen Bader, is that the right name?
Carol Bader.
Carol Bader, excuse me, ran what was described at the time as a silent court. That which I guess, as described in the media at the time, that nobody was there. Like the parents weren't there; they were not allowed in to her proceedings.
That happened a lot. So in Missouri, a part of the foster care reform bill of 2005 was that they opened the court. I mean, they basically said that if your Aunt Susie or whoever, you can come in and watch court happen. But what she would do, she would have the hearing that she had to have to get adjudication, which most people just surrendered and signed a document. But what happened at review hearings is she would not have people come in the courtroom. You would all gather in the hallway and people would pass memoranda around, and either people would sign it or they would not. And if they refused to sign, somebody would make a notation on it. Refused to sign, meaning to say they did not agree with whatever everybody had been told they were going to do already. It was really not a court proceeding. And if you wanted to take up an issue before the court, you had to basically demand it. And once you got in there, it did not go well for a person who demanded that. So it was bizarre in the extreme, really, as to how things went. On one occasion, I had a client in Missouri. There's a procedure to get rid of a judge. You can file a request to change judge, and it is automatic if you do it in time. Well, in most cases in Missouri, you do that within 30 days. In juvenile cases, it was different because of the speed with which you had to do it. Mm-hmm. So you had to file a request for change of judge within 5 days of the day the judge was assigned, or the day the case was set for trial, whichever was later. So to keep anyone from taking a change of judge from her, she had all of the juvenile cases. In order to prevent anybody from ever taking a change of judge, she set the case for trial the second the petition was filed. Every petition got filed, and she set it for trial on that day. So you only had 5 days. So on one occasion, a sad mother who had her child taken from the hospital came into me on day 3. So I was able to take a change of judge, and when I did, it was a terrible reaction that she had. She basically tried to have a hearing that she was not allowed to have. She yelled and cursed at me and threw me out of her courtroom. And I went back to my law firm where we used to have lunch in the basement, and I was talking to we always, the lawyers all would talk about what they were dealing with, and everybody had to deal with my stories about the injustices of juvenile court. And I said, I've had it. I'm going to file a complaint. I'm going to complain to the bar. I'm going to complain to the ethics commission. I'm going to complain to everybody. And our senior partner told me, now, Darrell, take it easy. Don't do that. That won't work. The only solution to this problem is the voters. And so from that day, that was 2 years before the filing. From that day, we started looking for somebody to run against this judge. And after 2 years, we never found anyone. And so it was the weekend before the filing deadline, and I was pacing in the kitchen, and my wife stopped me and said, just do it yourself. That's crazy. I was only 34. I knew no people. I was in the wrong political party. I didn't have any money. How are we going to do that? But I went in the next day to my law firm, and I said, we have to find somebody to run for judge in the next 24 hours, or I'm going to come in and do it myself.
Okay. So be honest here, because I wasn't around, so I don't know the true history. Would it be accurate to say that you won that election because you persuaded voters on a child welfare agenda?
Oh, you betcha.
You did.
Absolutely. It was absolutely. And it was, so the rules in Missouri at the time, we had this rule that said when you're running for judge, you were not allowed to take up any positions on disputed legal issues. So that was very difficult because I had an issue. So instead of expressing any opinions, I created this flyer which listed facts. Fact: Missouri has more foster children than any county of our size. Fact. They go home at an astonishingly low rate. Fact, I listed these facts. And it was in the middle of that. It was in the middle of my campaign in July of 2002 that a Supreme Court case came down that said that judges can have opinions. And I proceeded to have a whole lot of opinions after that. But it was the issue. The issue was this. And 2 days, John, after I filed, I got a call from someone who said, "We don't know who you are, but we are for you. And we're having a meeting and we're asking you to come to the meeting." So I went to this meeting. What I found at the meeting were 60 angry grandmothers, because this judge, no matter what the law said, did not favor relative placements. You had to jump through 15 different kinds of hoops in order to even be thought about as relative placement. Every child spent a good deal of time in foster care before they got to a relative placement. And it was rare to find a child placed with a grandmother. And all these grandmothers had seen their children go into foster care, often because of their own child's addiction problem. And then they never saw that child again, ever. So,
wow.
Basically, I had this remarkable campaign team of angry grandmothers, aunts, uncles, dejected parents, people who just had been treated unfairly and were ready to do something about it. And they got me elected.
This week's episode of the Imprint Weekly podcast is brought to you by the National Foster Parent Association. The National Foster Parent Association is a nonprofit whose mission is to be a national voice for foster, kinship, and adoptive families through networking, education, and advocacy. The National Foster Parent Association offers resources and trainings to parents and professionals. To learn more, visit nfpaonline.org. That's nfpaonline.org. Now we're going to talk in a minute about why you're still in Missouri and doing this new job, but I want to kind of go a little bit out of order and ask you, what about your time on the bench? What about being a judge? Because now, obviously, as I said in the intro, you're the child welfare director. What about that job prepared you for this one that you're doing now? And what have you had to kind of learn on the job?
This is totally new. It is totally new to me. And, my time on the bench, I did not plan to be a judge. I did not want to be a judge. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a trial attorney and stand in front of juries and get them to do the right thing. That was what I envisioned my career being. But once I got onto the bench, it really gelled with me. The opportunity to hear people and listen to them and try to make something fair, it really mattered to me. But the additional thing that happened beyond just sitting and listening to a lot of cases is I became involved in sort of the policy wing of the judiciary with regard to these issues. So I was on the Family Court Committee. I served at the Children's Services Commission. I was in the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative Program. I chaired the committee to expand that through Missouri. And so I had those contacts with the policy piece, but being a part of an executive branch of government, I had never done anything in the executive branch of government. I had never supervised anybody besides my clerk and my court reporter. And I had never experienced any of that. So I came to Jefferson City with a lot of ideas, a lot of philosophy and policy that I think was the right things to do. And I really needed to learn all the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is daunting. I never had any idea. And you got to go through a computer portal to wipe your nose in state government. It's really an amazing thing. And I had a lot of help. From the department director, Robert Nodell, gave me a whole lot of assistance. And with help and with a lot of support, been able to handle that just fine.
So going back in order now, we just jumped ahead to you taking this job, but it's kind of quite a quirky story how you even ended up there. So you did almost 20 years on the bench and were headed out of Missouri before they pulled you back in. So what happened there?
Right. So I was going to retire. I had gotten to my 20 years. I was going to be 55 and have 20 years, which means you could retire, which I think is ridiculously young to retire, but I was ridiculously young to have run for judge. So what I wanted to do was I had applied for the Court of Appeals a few times and I was not getting anywhere in that. And I thought, you know what? All my children had gone to Florida. My wife's family was in Florida. Everybody wanted to be in Florida. And I thought, you know what? I don't have to be a judge. The only thing holding me here now is me. After my mom passed away in 2018. And she was really my responsibility to help take care of her was the only thing besides my work holding me in Missouri, which I love Missouri, but it was when everybody else wanted to be someplace else. But when Mom passed away, the job was it. And I thought, I don't have to be a judge. I don't have to have this particular career. And I thought, I can retire from this and I can move to Florida and I can try to find something in this space, actually. I thought, in the child welfare space that matters and that where I can make a contribution. And I could do that from there. And so that was the plan. I was planning to do that. So we sold our house. We sold our house here in Fenton, Missouri. We sold the house. I moved everybody to Florida. I stayed with a friend here while I was going to finish out my term, and I was going to be done. And then I teach juvenile justice at the Judicial College, our judicial education program that we have every year. I was going to teach that at the Fall College, which was in Kansas City that year. And the director of our department, Robert Nodell, asked me to come to his office to tell him my opinions about child welfare. And I thought that's a great opportunity. The new guy's coming in and asking my opinion. I'll give him my opinion. So I came to Jefferson City. I met with Robert Nodell. He asked my opinions. I gave him my opinions. And then he said, what would you think of being the director of Children's Division? I thought, what? I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm a judge. I do judge stuff. But as I thought about it, after talking with Robert and the opportunity to really have an impact on this area of practice on the child welfare system, I thought that this is an opportunity I can't pass up because this has driven my career. I care about it more than I can think of caring about anything else in government. And I thought I got to take the opportunity to try to help make this better. So that's how I got here.
What did you tell him at that meeting?
Well, I'll tell you, when you don't know you're interviewing for a job, you'll just let it all out.
Yeah.
And so I told him exactly what I thought. And what I thought was, Robert, this thing is upside down and inside out. It is done completely wrong. I said, you have a reactive system that's driven by fear. That's what you have. You have a system where it's snatch and grab kids when you're afraid something's going to happen, regardless of what the facts say, regardless of what policy might say, regardless of what the data tells you. You're going to take every kid you can because you don't want to be that person that something happened on your watch and something might go wrong. It's not something has gone wrong. It's something might go wrong. I said, so you have a reactive system driven by fear. I said, and you need a proactive system driven by hope and evidence and best practice. And you need to get some people out front on these cases and work with these families rather than just investigate them and it's not enough, and then investigate them again and say it's not enough, and you wait until it is enough, and then by that time that family is sick and beaten up and in trouble, and now we take their kids away as if that's going to solve something. And in a good number of these places, the relative placements aren't favored, and in some places they're not, and so the kids wind up in a foster system and they go through. I said, you need to turn that upside down. And he really understood it. I think I could tell he really understood what I was talking about when I said that. And so really when I came with a complete mandate because he knew exactly what I thought should happen in unequivocal terms. It is that this system needs to become less reactive, more proactive, more pro-family, because that's where kids flourish. And we need to be fair. And we need to do everything we can to help people.
And so obviously one piece of the continuum that's really emblematic of what you're talking about is the number of kids that you have in the system. Like the number of foster youth and foster care overall in this country has dropped actually quite a bit since 2018, especially since the pandemic. Missouri saw, a slight drop heading into the early months of the pandemic, but then it really shot up over 14,000 afterwards. What is it about the practice in Missouri? Like, what do you think the system there, in your mind, gets wrong the most? Is it mistaking, straight up poverty? Do they sort of give up on parents who use drugs too quickly? Are there some pretty identifiable things that you are kind of starting with, frankly, now that you're in leadership?
Yeah, I think that our first reaction is to take a child into foster care rather than the last resort. An analogy that I use when I go and talk everywhere is we need to think of foster care more like as if it were medicine. If we were practicing medicine, it'd be like surgery. Sometimes you have to do emergency surgery, but most of the time what you have to do is you have to do some testing and you need to do some therapy and you need to try some more conservative approaches first before you do this thing. And I think we go directly to surgery. I think some of it is structural. Some of it is the nature of our system. We have a strange position in Missouri called a juvenile officer. Other states do not have juvenile officers. And what a juvenile officer is a juvenile officer is a separate entity that kind of acts like a prosecutor with regard to these cases. And most of those people do not have training in child welfare. Most of those people have training in law enforcement, because that used to be those folks were doing delinquency, and then child welfare just kind of got superimposed upon it. Those juvenile officers do not answer to anybody in the executive branch of government. They answer to judges. It used to be they answered to the judge who heard the case, which was terrible. Now we've got a judicial rule that they answer to a judge down the hall from the judge who hears the case. That changed, I don't know exactly how many years ago, but when it changed, we did that in Jefferson County. We did that at my suggestion by local court rule, because I thought it was just horribly unfair that somebody is hearing a case and trying a case in front of me against people who answer to me. It clearly violates everything about separation of powers and all the things we know about American government.
Yeah, to quote yourself to you, I thought it was really well stated, because what Director Missey is talking about is truly one of the more peculiar realities in child welfare in any state. This judicial officer presence, it is a pretty unique thing. And you wrote in the Josh Kagan's kind of assessment of this several years ago, and I'm going to quote here: "As I hear people talk about the differences in juvenile courts from circuit to circuit, it occurs to me that those juvenile courts take on the personality and philosophy of their judges too," which is exactly what I've heard from other people, is like, look, this is a weird thing. And when a judge is good, it kind of makes it easier for them to do good. But when it's a problematic viewpoint from the bench, look out.
Right. And what a judge defines as good.
It's arbitrary.
Circuit to circuit. Yeah. And so you got justice by geography. Now, I thought Jefferson County was pretty awesome because it was me,
Right.
But somebody might think, well, if somebody had a position different from what mine is, should they be able to have to litigate that in front of me? And so what we did was we created sort of an imaginary wall. And so another judge would hear the case, and another judge would be the administrative judge of the family court. And the Supreme Court, I think really with the leadership of Judge Patricia Breckenridge, she was really the leader on this. She heard about our rule and thought that's the very least we can do. And the Supreme Court did that. Now, what the consequence has been is that in some circuits that's worked splendidly, and in others it's made no difference whatsoever. In some places it's made it even a little worse, because what you have is the judge who knew juvenile has stopped doing juvenile and now spread it out among their associate circuit judges, and they don't know these cases. And they'll react based on what? Based on fear that something's going to go wrong. And I answer to this electorate, and I don't want to be the judge who has let a child go home and then something goes wrong, which we all know will happen eventually sometime, because bad things sometimes happen. And then, so you have a very interesting political situation. And that problem can only be resolved, I think, by the legislature. Nobody's had really the desire to take on that battle just yet.
All right. So how would you describe, you've articulated kind of what you said to your boss that you didn't know was going to be your boss. Now, what would you describe as kind of your plan and priorities for affecting change and how this system operates in Missouri? Give listeners sort of, the three most important things that need to happen, let's say I don't know where the governor is in his term in Missouri, but let's say in the next 2-3 years.
The governor's term ends in 580 some odd days, I think. So as the old Jerry Reed song said, we got a long way to go and a short time to get there, I guess. But I think it's essentially this. Well, the first thing I did was I went around and I listened to people, and I also talked to them about our mindset. What is our mindset? And I think we've really worked on the mindset of our folks. And I think they were already there. So it was pretty easy because they want to help people. And we've made progress with that. We just had great success in the legislature with our budget requests to help us do these things. So the first thing that I thought we had to do is we had to stabilize our workforce. Our turnover is really terrible. And part of it was because we had the lowest wages in America for people doing this work. And so great progress was made on that, part of a $22 million package. And we're now close to the average of the states that surround Missouri. So that has helped. Our hiring has begun. We were terribly understaffed. and had a whole lot of openings and a whole lot of turnover. That we seem to be turning the corner on that. So that's good. The other thing that needs to happen is we need to actually have some people dedicated to prevention. Our force here in Missouri is undersized, and we had nobody dedicated to prevention. So part of the budget was at 100 new people, which is a drop in the bucket. But I told people it's part of phase one, and we can do something with that cohort. We can get something started with 100 people who will do basic primary prevention. We're hoping to house them in the community, in schools and hospitals and police stations and places where the removals begin, where the hotlines are made to say, okay, we've got a family in crisis. How can we help this family without them intersecting the rest of this system? Pre-hotline even. Can we do some team decision-making meetings? Those had been basically wiped out in Missouri. We're bringing them back, and really, because I think that's the kind of thing my family could have used, and really do some prevention on the front end. That will slow down the number of kids coming into care. A lot of those kids will still come into care, but not as many and not as fast. On the back end, we also, part of the budget that we received funding for 34 new lawyers to litigate some of these cases that are just languishing in our court systems. I'm a student. I'm learning a lot about child welfare on the executive side of this thing. But in that court system, this is what I know. And I know that we can move those cases. I know that they can go out faster. So the plan really is that we slow down the incoming, right, and keep people safe at home when we can. We speed up the conclusion of cases to get kids where they need to be in a permanent kind of way. Get the adoption done, get the guardianship done. When it's time to do that, we do that, and we don't wait around for nothing. If we're beyond a permanency hearing and there's a plan besides going home, these cases do not get better with age. Let's try them promptly. And so we've got the lawyers to do that. If we can do that and lower the caseloads as time goes on, we can shift people who are in the force from foster care case management toward prevention, toward early intervention in the lives of children and families. And then we will have a healthier system with fewer kids in care. At least that's the hope.
Richard Wexler of the National Coalition for Child Protection Reform, who's I think is kind of ideologically aligned with a lot of what you're saying here, criticized you kind of early on for this, plan. And I think his comment in a local op-ed was, in a state where the knee-jerk response has been to take the child and run, another hiring binge is just going to further widen the net of coercive intervention. So, what would you say to that? And, how has this gone? I mean, would you say that you guys are at the workforce capacity that you wanted by now?
I think the workforce capacity that we need is much higher than we have, or we were going to be able to accomplish getting it added in one legislative term. And so the only thing you can do, and as I read Richard's op-ed piece, and I smiled because I agreed with 85% of what that guy said in that piece. I agreed with his philosophy. I agreed with his concern. I agreed with the whole thing. What I think he lacks understanding in is how weird Missouri is. I mean, he sounds like he really knows what he's talking about with regard to child welfare, but Missouri is an odd duck, because here's the thing about Children's Division. In Missouri, Children's Division does not take children. We do not remove children. Juvenile officers remove children. And we're standing toe-to-toe with juvenile officers who are not trained in child welfare normally, who get scared and take children. Our job is to make reasonable efforts not to have them leave their homes. Our job is to make reasonable efforts to get them home. We're the only ones that do that. These juvenile officers, by the way, juvenile offices were fully staffed when we were having these conversations. They had all the lawyers that they needed, and we had none of this stuff. So the people who take children away are fully armed, and we who are charged with keeping children at home or trying to get them home were ill-equipped. So my argument was and is, I've got to get this organization fully staffed, and I have to have some people dedicated, absolutely dedicated, to doing exactly what Richard thinks we should do. I think and I hope that this time next year, he'll be able to look at what we've done and say, well, it looks like they're doing okay. I'll tell you that just by talking about prevention, just by talking about trying to keep families together, just by having conversations like this, without any tools, without any resources whatsoever, we have reduced the number of kids in foster care over the past year by 1,000, which I think is a good start, a really good start.
As far as the composition of out-of-home care there, I kind of got the vibe from your earlier comments that you feel like the state historically hasn't relied enough on kin, either, I guess, to foster kids or to, serve as guardians. What's your sense on what that would take? Do you feel like you guys have made progress in the last year or so on that? What steps do you envision taking to move towards more kin involvement?
Well, I think that Missouri is doing better than a lot of places. Based on what the numbers I've seen, we are at 50% with relatives. That's a really high number as compared to a lot of places. I don't think anybody's high enough. I think it ought to be 75%. And part of this comes from my training as a lawyer. I come at this like a lawyer. I look at it from a legal perspective. When I was a young lawyer, I had a colleague of mine, one of my law partners who was much older than I was, and it was a mentor of mine, Nick Gassaway, just was befuddled by the child welfare system because what he said is, back in the day, we did not have a child welfare system. We did not have all this. Here's what we had. We had the probate code. We had guardianships being done by whoever was significant in that child's life. If mom was on drugs, if dad was an alcoholic, if everybody's in prison, Aunt Susie would be not only could she come and request, she would be sought out by what Nick called the welfare office. The welfare office seek out Aunt Susie, and they would take care of it. So one of the things I tell people as I go around the state, I do a little talk called the 10 directives, and directive number 5 is embrace the probate code. Just embrace guardianships. If parents aren't around and the kids are with relatives that love them and are committed to taking care of them, then they can use the probate code, and that family can take care of themselves. And that always worked. And so people have gravitated toward that idea. I think we can do that more quickly in cases where parents aren't going to be able to do what they need to do within the ASFA timeframes to get this together, and we can have those kids be with people that they know and love. And so I think that as many of these relative placements as we can get, we should do. The real interesting thing, John, is that it varies from county to county in Missouri because it's the philosophy of the judge. And so, my home county, Jefferson County, when I left the bench was close to 70%. St. Louis County directly to the north was in the neighborhood of 40, and it was because there was a differing philosophy. And by the way, our legislature has really pushed on this. They keep saying you will place with relatives. Relatives are the first choice. Grandparents are the first choice among relatives. They now, in just this past legislative session, said that we have to make serious search for these relatives, and they've detailed what those things are. The places we'll call and the places we'll look and the people with whom we will talk in order to get those relatives placements to happen. I had a senator talk to me this legislative session, called me over into her office and said, what do we have to do to get you folks to place with relatives like you're supposed to? Well, saying that to me is like asking Elon Musk what you have to do to get electric vehicles on the road. I mean, that is who I am. That's what I am. But it's not what every court is. And so it's something we're going to keep working on. But I think it's something we need to work on as a nation because those kids just do better with people that they know and love, even if they're not perfect.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, the administration just kind of recently put out a guidance that I think there are a final proposed rule they're hoping will kind of make it easier. I don't know if you felt like it would help Missouri, or if it's sort of handling things that Missouri's already working on.
I think it will help, John, because when they're talking about licensure, right? They're talking about should we have a different standard of licensure for a grandmother than you have for a stranger? The idea that we don't is a real problem because it is a totally different thing to have a child place with grandma and not with it. Well, for example, let's take criminal history. Grandma did some wild things in the 1970s. Okay, now grandma
who didn't in the 70s?
Right. It was the 1970s, and so she's got some criminal history, and now grandma is a 60-something-year-old, a cobbler baking, quilt knitting, member of the church choir, and now grandma is still not fit because she's got this serious thing that happened in 1978, and it's like, well, wait a minute, does that make any sense? But what I would do, John, and the reason my numbers were different is I did not care about Children's Division's licensure. I did not care what some bureaucrat told me was or was not appropriate or fit or what anything else. My concern was for that child and that family, and where is that child's heart and mind? And if Aunt Susie happens to have a misdemeanor marijuana offense from a float trip she took on the Merrimack River in 1992, that is not going to stop me from placing this child who loves her with her when it's completely safe to do it. But what judges sometimes think is they think, well, Children's Division isn't licensing them. I heard a judge say this at the Judicial College once. If Children's Division won't license them, do I want to be the judge who overruled them and placed a child there and something goes wrong? Do I want that on me? Well, a Children's Division, if you really ask them, I mean, they're us, they're me. In my experience, when I would ask somebody who was a case manager, when I would do some probing questions beyond, are they licensable? Do you feel like this placement is safe? Is this where this child wants to go? Does this person want this child? Do they love each other? Does it seem safe? Is there any other place where you think this child would flourish more? And I would get the right answers to those questions to make that placement, but they did not technically fit for licensure. Sometimes they would not fit for licensure because of space problems in the house, which was ridiculous because my grandparents, neither of them would have been licensable. If they would not have been. Or there's some other relative in the house who has a criminal conviction. So how many poor families have grandma and grandpa are just fine, but Uncle John's had some problems, and Uncle John's back from parole. He's on parole, having been let out of the prison because his addiction problem got him arrested for the 15th time. And it's Uncle John, and he's never done anything to kids, and he's not been violent to anybody. He's just got a felony conviction. If he's in that house, we can't license it. And then this child, instead of going to the family that this child loves, instead is going to be put in a foster system where they may or may not have multiple placements. And, I think that the opportunity to be able to consider different licensing standards is going to make a difference to those people who aren't courageous enough to say, I don't care about licensing standards.
The National Association of Counsel for Children advances children's and parents' rights by supporting a diverse, inclusive community of child welfare lawyers to provide zealous legal representation, and by advocating for equitable anti-racist solutions co-designed by people with lived experience. Learn more at naccchildlaw.org, counselforkids.org, and at our 46th National Child Welfare Law Conference this August.
Let's stick with federal policy stuff for a minute here. Missouri was recently approved to receive federal funding for foster care prevention services under the Family First Act, which I won't go into a big explanation of. I'll drop a link to our little handy dandy guide to it. But bottom line, it opens up the child welfare entitlement, the federal one, for the first time for, so-called foster care prevention services. Now, my question to you is that I noticed in the Missouri state plan that the services you guys picked, by my tally, are entirely programs focused on child behavioral issues. Is that what you all heard as the biggest need when you kind of did a listening tour?
No, it is not what we heard when we did the listening tour. That plan was being drafted before I got here. When I saw it, I was mightily disappointed. Because I think it's not enough. I think everything you're looking at there, it's almost as if, well, those are programs that directed toward child conduct or issues, relationship issues between the child and the parent. And you could say that the parent was not at fault for those things. I mean, I don't know if that's the philosophy that drove that decision, but that certainly looks like it to me. We got a couple of counseling programs. By the way, nobody in the state provides those programs yet. So we've got to get somebody to ramp those up, which will be moderately helpful for those difficult cases that are like that. But I don't believe that's really what drives our numbers. What really drives our numbers is poverty, addiction, and mental illness. So we're hoping to be able to get programs up and running that will be like that. We're working now. We've got a new deputy director of prevention who is really working hard to find service providers to add things to our plan that would be in the federal clearinghouse for which we could get money, and then talk to the legislature about helping us by providing the part of the funding they need to provide to make that happen. So that's what I'm hoping is going to happen. And I believe this time next year, we will have a more vibrant plan.
Any one or two models and programs in the clearinghouse list that you're dying to get, tapped into?
Well, I wish the clearinghouse were different, John. I wish they had opened this thing up and said, go experiment. You got 5 years to experiment. And if you're doing great, you can keep doing it. I think that's what I would have preferred. But as I look at it, I think a lot of the home visiting programs would be very good. I think that one of our judges has got a program where he's kind of got home visiting, which is kind of mixed in with a treatment court pre-adjudication model, where if you'll agree to be checked on every 24 hours and you'll do the treatment program and we'll look in on you and you'll do the drug screens and all, we'll dismiss your case after 6 months. And so far that's been remarkably successful. I would like to see that kind of thing happen around the state and, in ways that each circuit can make those kind of things happen. I would really like to see things done for some of those drug treatment things for single moms that are struggling financially. I think all those things are things that would be very helpful to us.
Yeah. Other side of the Family First Act, so we've been talking about the money it opened up. It also put some limits on federal funding going to group homes, institutions, so-called congregate care. How, if at all, have those federal limits impacted Missouri?
I think it's profoundly impacted us because we lost capacity. I mean, when people saw that's where we were going, they just shut the doors. Like, there's not going to be funding for this, so we're not doing anything. So we lack access to some residential placements when we need them, and a lot of those kids are dealing with behavioral problems and mental illness. And so we have people who are not the juvenile officers. Again, go back to juvenile officers. Juvenile officers are often not filing delinquency petitions against kids who commit criminal conduct because they're like, well, this is behavioral and mental health. And then we've got kids falling into the gaps that exist between our system and the Department of Mental Health. And so they end up being unable to be placed anywhere. And so they sometimes wind up in our offices and they wind up in hospitals. We are working with a lot of hospital partners and treatment providers and people who can help us try to stand up something that is, for emergency placements. But the residential piece, the lack of access we have to it when we need it has really impacted us, because some of these kids are not able to be placed in a foster home because foster homes just won't take them.
Mm. Interesting. So if I'm hearing you right, you've been critical of some of the historical outlays of service in Missouri, but am I hearing you right that you kind of feel like maybe it's the state's reliance on congregate care was kind of proportional to need, they were not overusing it, and that you have now gone to where you're under capacity?
I think we are under capacity. I think it probably was overused some before. Mm-hmm. And when it was overused, I mean, it would be used for too long, right. So a child goes there and they're going to grow up there. Nobody should grow up in a residential facility. It should be a place you go for a short time and then you're back into the community. I think right now, the combination of that loss of capacity and the loss of capacity of our delinquency system has created something of a crisis, that we don't have places for kids to go because their behaviors are such. And I've never, I was on the bench for 19 years and I've never seen some of the behaviors, the mental health kind of things that I have seen since I've come here. And I don't know if it has to do with COVID, with regard to the isolation that happened as a result of that. But we have some serious behavioral and mental health problems that are unlike anything I have ever seen before.
Darrell Missey, Child Welfare Director in the state of Missouri. Thanks for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you, John. It's been a real honor, and I've enjoyed it a lot.
Thanks to Missouri Child Welfare Director Darrell Missey for joining us today. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is the division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Anjoko with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elia. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you'd consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, it is very easy. You just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @TheImprintNews and visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. And you can always email us at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.